What if the single greatest secret of the British royal family was not about money, titles, or marriages, but about the tragic death of the woman who defined an era? What if Princess Diana's final words were not about her children's happiness, not about forgiveness, not even about love, but about the truth of her own death? Think about that for a second. Because if that is true, then everything we've been told for the last 2.5 decades may not just be incomplete. It may be a carefully crafted illusion. The story of Diana's death is one you've heard before, over and over again, replayed through documentaries, newspapers, interviews, and conspiracy theories. The late-night car crash in Paris, the paparazzi chase, the seatbelt, the tunnel, the sirens, the grief that brought the world to its knees. But here's the thing. The more we revisit it, the less it feels like a simple accident, and the more it feels like a puzzle with missing pieces. And those missing pieces, according to whispers from behind palace walls, were known to Diana herself. In fact, she may have predicted them. She may have begged her sons to one day bring the truth into the light. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But before we even get to William and Harry's tears, before King Charles's shocking revelation, before Diana's haunting request comes roaring back into focus, we need to ask, why now? Why, after decades of silence, would this secret resurface? Why would King Charles, a man whose entire reign depends on stability, risk opening old wounds by sharing his late ex-wife's chilling words? And why does this matter to you, to me, to all of us, here and now in 2025? Because Diana was not just a princess. She was a symbol. She was humanity inside an institution built on control. She was vulnerability in a palace made of stone. Her death marked the end of innocence for the monarchy and the beginning of relentless scrutiny. Every scandal that has rocked the Windsors since, Meghan and Harry's departure, Andrew's disgrace, Charles's own controversial rise to the throne, all of it is tethered back to that single moment in 1997 when the People's Princess was lost. So if her dying wish was to protect the truth about my death, then that changes the entire story of the monarchy itself. It means history was not written honestly. It means a cover-up may have defined the last 28 years. And this is where things get truly unsettling. Because the royal family has mastered one thing above all else: silence. When scandal hits, they don't explain, they endure. When truth threatens, they don't reveal, they retreat. And yet, we now learn that Diana may have entrusted a message to her sons, a plea carried across decades like a ticking time bomb. Imagine the weight of that on William, the heir to the throne, who must balance his duty to the crown with his duty to his mother. Imagine the torment of Harry, the rebel son, who has already risked it all to break free from the palace machine, now realizing he may carry the key to the biggest secret of all. And imagine Charles, finally king, finally crowned, realizing he cannot escape Diana's shadow, that her voice, even in death, has the power to shake his reign. Do you see the stakes here? This is not just about family drama. This is about monarchy versus truth, loyalty versus justice, father versus sons, the memory of Diana against the survival of the institution. It's Shakespearean in its weight, biblical in its betrayal. And you, the audience, the public, the people Diana always said she wanted to serve, are at the heart of it. Because it is your belief, your trust, your judgment, that keeps the monarchy alive. Now, let's take a step back. Picture Diana in the final weeks of her life. She's holidaying in the Mediterranean, photographed on yachts, smiling but with that unmistakable flicker of worry behind her eyes. She writes notes to friends about dark forces surrounding her. She tells journalists off the record that she fears an accident is being planned. And then, Paris, the Ritz, the Mercedes, the tunnel, the crash, the aftermath that made her sons orphans. Does it not make you wonder? If she sensed something coming, if she truly felt hunted, then how could her death be treated as nothing more than a tragic accident? Here's where the story shifts. Because according to insiders, Diana didn't just voice her fears. She confided them. She put them into words. And those words, her dying wish, were not random paranoia. They were a calculated warning. She wanted her sons, William and Harry, to be guardians of the truth, to never let her story be whitewashed into a fairy tale of tragic fate. to make sure the world remembered her as she was, a woman fighting a system she could never fully escape. But here's the twist. William and Harry didn't hear this directly from her, not in the way you might think, because Diana never got the chance to sit them down and say those words. She left fragments, letters, conversations with trusted allies, hints scattered like breadcrumbs. And for years, those breadcrumbs were hidden, kept from her sons by the very people who claimed to be protecting them. Which leads us to King Charles, the man who knew more than he ever let on. The man who finally, after decades, told William and Harry about Diana's last plea. A man torn between protecting his throne and telling the truth. And when he did, the brothers broke down in tears. Can you feel the gravity of that? Two grown men, heirs of the crown, reduced to sobbing boys by the voice of their mother, echoing from beyond the grave. This isn't just about grief. This is about betrayal. This is about decades of silence crashing down on their shoulders. This is about realizing that their mother may have died not in an accident, but in a calculated event she foresaw, and that they were deliberately shielded from her final words until now. So let me ask you, if you were William, would you risk destabilizing the monarchy by speaking out? Or would you stay silent, honoring the crown but betraying your mother? And if you were Harry, already cast as the family's black sheep, would you seize this chance to reveal everything? Or would you hesitate, knowing it could shatter what little remains of your relationship with your father and brother? That's the conflict. That's the storm brewing beneath the gilded facade of Buckingham Palace. And that's why we're here today, to peel back the layers of secrecy, to follow Diana's trail of warnings, to explore how her words still haunt the royal family nearly 3 decades after her death. But here's the part that no one saw coming. Because Diana's dying wish wasn't just about her death. It was about her legacy. It was about truth as a weapon against lies, love as a weapon against fear. And as Charles finally confessed what she said, William and Harry were faced with a choice: protect the monarchy or protect their mother's truth. A choice that could divide them forever or unite them in ways no one expects. And as we dive deeper into Diana's final days, into the night of the crash, into the secrets buried in royal vaults, one thing becomes clear. The truth may finally be breaking free. But at what cost? And who will pay the price? Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if I told you that the last summer of Diana's life was more like the final act of a suspense thriller than the peaceful holiday the cameras try to sell us? Behind every glamorous photograph, behind every smile on the deck of a yacht, there was a woman who believed she was being hunted. Not figuratively. Literally. Diana told friends she felt she was being watched, that something dark was looming, and that her days might be numbered. Imagine living under that shadow, knowing your every move might be your last. Let's start with the setting. The summer of 1997. Diana was no longer the shy young bride who had walked down the aisle 16 years earlier. She was 36 years old, divorced, and more independent than ever. The world adored her. The press couldn't get enough of her. And yet, she was also vulnerable. Her relationship with Dodi Fayed had just begun making headlines. Paparazzi trailed her relentlessly, and Diana, despite her radiant appearance, carried with her a gnawing fear. She told close confidants that she believed the establishment wanted her out of the way. Now pause for a moment and think. How often do we hear stories of someone predicting their own death, only for it to come true? Rarely. And when it does, it chills us to the bone. Diana was no exception. She wasn't some paranoid recluse. She was a global icon, a mother of 2 princes, and one of the most photographed women in history. If she said she was being targeted, shouldn't we take that seriously? Or was she simply overwhelmed by years of harassment and media intrusion? That's the question that makes her final weeks so haunting. One of the most startling things Diana said in those days was to her lawyer, Lord Mishkin. She confided to him that there was a plot to stage an accident involving her car. Not a random mishap, not a vague fear, a staged accident. And Mishkin was so alarmed, he actually made a written note of it. Now think about that. A legal professional, trusted by Diana, believed her enough to put pen to paper. Those notes still exist. They were later handed over to police after her death, and they make your stomach turn when you read them, because only weeks later, the very thing she feared came to pass. Meanwhile, to the outside world, Diana's life looked charmed. photographed on a Mediterranean yacht, playing with Dodi's jet skis, smiling at cameras. The tabloids went wild. They framed her as carefree, in love, living her best post-divorce life. But insiders say the truth was very different. Behind those smiles, Diana was unsettled. She told her butler Paul Burrell that she was convinced they were after her. She felt her phone was tapped. She was uneasy about her security arrangements. And she constantly looked over her shoulder. Does that sound like a woman at peace? Or does it sound like someone waiting for the blow to fall? And then there was her role as a mother. Diana adored William and Harry. Every decision she made was filtered through her desire to protect them. But in those final weeks, she worried about leaving them behind. She allegedly told friends she needed to prepare her sons for a life without her. A chilling thought, isn't it? The idea of a mother sensing she wouldn't live to see her children grow up. That sense of impending doom seeps through her words, like storm clouds gathering over a calm sea. Let's also not forget the political backdrop. Diana had become a thorn in the side of the establishment. Her high-profile campaigns against landmines embarrassed governments and arms manufacturers alike. She was redefining the role of a royal woman, without being royal anymore. She was stepping into global humanitarian activism that overshadowed even the Queen at times. And then came her romance with Dodi, son of billionaire Mohammed Al Fayed. To some, it was love. To others, it was scandal. To the establishment, it was a threat. Imagine the people's princess, mother of the future king, marrying into a wealthy Egyptian Muslim family. The idea alone rattled the corridors of Buckingham Palace. Now let me ask you, was Diana paranoid or perceptive? Was she creating drama out of fear or reading the signs everyone else ignored? Consider this. She had already survived years of manipulation, betrayal, and media cruelty. She had endured her husband's very public affair with Camilla Parker Bowles. She had battled depression and bulimia. She had been stripped of her HRH title. This was not a woman prone to unfounded hysteria. This was a woman who had learned, the hard way, to recognize when danger was closing in. And yet, even with that fear hanging over her, Diana radiated light in public. That's what made her so magnetic. She smiled, she comforted, she reached out. She shook hands with AIDS patients when others wouldn't. She hugged children in war zones. She was photographed laughing with her boys on holiday. That duality, fear on the inside, warmth on the outside, is what makes her final days so haunting. It's as if she knew she had little time left, but she was determined to spend it making a difference. Now picture this. August 1997. Diana boards the plane to Paris. She's exhausted, restless, but still glowing in the camera's flash. The tabloids are foaming with speculation about an engagement ring allegedly purchased by Dodi. The press is ravenous. And Diana, feeling suffocated, makes one last call to her sons. William and Harry are in Balmoral with their father. The call is short, rushed. None of them realize it will be the last time they ever hear her voice. Imagine the weight of that call in hindsight. Harry later said he would regret it for the rest of his life, that he cut the call short because he wanted to get back to playing with his cousins. That regret, that heartbreak, still haunts him today. And then, the final hours begin to tick away. Diana and Dodi at the Ritz. The paparazzi gathering outside like vultures. Security arrangements changed at the last minute. The decision to take the back exit. Henri Paul behind the wheel. The chase begins. And with every turn of the wheel, Diana's fears begin to crystallize into reality. Do you see the picture forming here? Diana's last days weren't just glamorous holidays. They were filled with ominous warnings, chilling predictions, and a mother's desperate attempts to shield her children from what she sensed was coming. She wasn't paranoid. She was preparing. And the question that lingers like a ghost is this. If she knew something, if she left behind warnings, then why weren't they enough to save her? Because what followed in Paris wasn't just tragedy. It was the very scenario she had described to those closest to her. And when you line up the pieces, it's impossible to ignore the eerie accuracy of her fears. The handwriting on the wall was there. She saw it. She said it. And then it happened. But here's where the story takes its first major turn. Because while the world was grieving, while William and Harry were walking behind their mother's coffin, while the monarchy was scrambling to contain the fallout, there was already evidence that Diana had tried to leave behind a warning, evidence that would later resurface, haunting the royal family and shaking the foundations of the official story. And that evidence? A note, a handwritten note, in Diana's own words. And what she wrote inside it changes everything. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the single most investigated car crash in history is still the least understood? Think about it. Thousands of pages of reports, multiple inquiries, countless documentaries. And yet, decades later, the death of Princess Diana remains surrounded by questions that refuse to die. Questions that cut deep into the heart of trust, truth, and power. Tonight, we step into the tunnel. And once you go there, you may never look at that night the same way again. Let's rewind to August 31st, 1997, the Ritz Hotel in Paris. Diana and Dodi Fayed finishing dinner, surrounded by cameras outside, flashes exploding like fireworks in the night. The paparazzi knew every exit, every move. They were like predators circling prey. Henri Paul, deputy head of security at the Ritz, stepped into the driver's seat of a black Mercedes S280. Alongside him, bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones, Dodi, and Diana herself. Their destination? Dodi's apartment, just minutes away. But those minutes would stretch into eternity. The car sped off just after midnight. Why so fast? Why choose that moment, that route, that driver? Witnesses recall the Mercedes hurtling down Parisian streets, headlights slicing through the dark. Behind them, a swarm of motorbikes carrying paparazzi, engines roaring, cameras ready. It was chaos on wheels. Now ask yourself, was this just celebrity harassment gone wrong, or was there more to it? They enter the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. Just seconds later, the world changes. The Mercedes slams into the 13th pillar at a speed investigators estimated at over 60 miles per hour. The crash is devastating. Metal crumples. Glass shatters. Screams echo in the tunnel. By the time first responders arrive, the scene is both surreal and horrifying. Dodi is dead. Henri Paul is dead. Diana is critically injured, fighting for her life. Trevor Rees-Jones, battered but alive, becomes the only survivor. Now here's where the mystery deepens. Official reports say Henri Paul was drunk. His blood alcohol level, they claimed, was more than 3 times the French legal limit. It became the convenient explanation: a reckless driver, a fast car, paparazzi pressure. End of story. Or was it? Because when you scratch the surface, that explanation begins to fall apart. First contradiction. Several witnesses that night insisted Henri Paul did not appear intoxicated. Hotel staff who saw him minutes before the drive described him as sober, composed, and in control. Surveillance footage from the Ritz showed him walking normally. No slurred speech. No stumbling. So how could a man who looked perfectly steady suddenly be 3 times over the limit? Second contradiction. The toxicology reports themselves. Mohammed Al-Fayed, Dodi's father, never accepted the official version. He questioned whether the samples tested were even Paul's. Others have pointed out inconsistencies in the lab work, blood alcohol levels that seemed unnaturally high, raising suspicions of tampering. If Henri Paul wasn't drunk, then what was really happening in that tunnel? And then comes the most chilling detail of all. Multiple witnesses reported seeing a bright flash of light in the tunnel just before the crash. Some described it as blinding, as though a strobe or spotlight had gone off. Others dismissed it as imagination. But ask yourself, why would so many accounts include the same strange detail? Could it have been a camera flash? Or something else entirely? Some theorists believe that flash may have been used to temporarily blind the driver, forcing the crash. Even more unsettling, no CCTV footage of the crash exists. Think about that. Paris, one of the most surveilled cities in the world. A central tunnel in the capital. And yet not a single working camera captured the crash. Authorities said the cameras weren't operating. Really? On that night? At that moment? Convenient, isn't it? And what about the paparazzi? Several were arrested at the scene, accused of obstructing emergency workers and even photographing Diana as she lay dying in the wreckage. But most were quickly released. Their photos, many of them never made public, remain locked away. What exactly did those lenses capture? What did they see that the rest of the world wasn't meant to? Now let's turn to the timeline of Diana's care. After the crash, she was still alive, breathing, conscious at moments, whispering words that haunt those who heard them. "Oh my God," she said. And reportedly, "Leave me alone." It took over an hour before she was moved from the scene. An hour. Some argue that in trauma cases, every minute matters. Was there a delay? Could she have been saved with faster intervention? French emergency protocols differ from British ones. They treat patients at the scene extensively before moving them. But critics say this decision sealed Diana's fate, that by the time she reached the hospital, it was too late. And then there's the larger question. Who benefited from Diana's death? Because in any investigation, motive matters. Who stood to gain? Some point to the monarchy itself, terrified at the prospect of Diana marrying Dodi, cementing a link to Mohammed al-Fayed's family. Others point to the political establishment, unnerved by Diana's activism on landmines and her potential global influence. Still others argue it was simply the tragic result of media obsession, nothing more sinister than paparazzi chasing a headline. But do you believe that? After everything you've heard? And don't forget, Diana herself had already predicted this. She told friends she feared an accident involving her car would be staged. She wrote it down. She warned people. So when it actually happened, how can we just dismiss it as coincidence? Isn't it more likely she knew exactly what forces were arrayed against her? Now imagine being William and Harry, just 15 and 12 at the time, watching the world debate whether their mother's death was an accident or an assassination. Imagine growing up with that shadow hanging over you, with whispers of conspiracy around every corner. Imagine discovering later in life that your mother may have left behind clues, notes, even a direct plea to you both to expose the truth. Wouldn't that shape every choice you made as adults? Wouldn't it haunt you every time you stepped in front of a camera, every time you saw your father, every time you wondered whether the institution you were born to serve had betrayed the woman who gave you life? So, what really happened in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel that night? Was it a tragic accident? A collision of speed, alcohol, and paparazzi chaos? Or was it, as Diana feared, something much darker? Because the next piece of evidence, Diana's own handwritten note, doesn't just suggest she anticipated her death. It suggests she knew exactly how it would happen. And once you read her words, there's no going back. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if I told you that Diana herself left behind a message so haunting, so specific, that it makes the official version of her death almost impossible to believe? Not rumors, not whispers, her own handwriting. A note that predicts her fate in detail, like a prophecy written in ink. Once you hear what she wrote, you'll never look at her death the same way again. Let's set the scene. October 1996. Diana is separated from Prince Charles. Their marriage, plagued by affairs and public humiliation, has crumbled. She is living at Kensington Palace, struggling to redefine her role in the world. She feels unsafe, isolated, and watched. So she picks up a pen. She writes to her trusted butler, Paul Burrell. And in that letter, she makes a statement that still chills everyone who reads it. She writes, "This particular phase in my life is the most dangerous. My husband is planning an accident in my car, brake failure and serious head injury. Think about that." Diana wasn't vague. She didn't say she feared something might happen. She described a staged car crash. She predicted a fatal head injury. And less than a year later, she would die in Paris from exactly that. Coincidence? Or confirmation that she knew what was coming? Now pause for a moment. Ask yourself, if you found a note like this, from someone who died in precisely the way they described, what would you think? Would you dismiss it as paranoia? Or would you see it as evidence of a plot? The establishment preferred the first answer. The world has leaned toward the second. And the note itself became the cornerstone of suspicion surrounding Diana's death. Paul Burrell, the man who revealed the note years later, described keeping it hidden in a safe for years after her death. He said he felt it was too dangerous to share. Too explosive. Imagine being the keeper of those words, knowing the world was being told her death was a tragic accident, while you held in your hands a letter suggesting it was anything but. That burden nearly broke him. But here's where the story gets even darker. According to reports, Diana didn't just confide in Burrell. She told friends and her lawyer, Lord Mishkin, about her fears. Mishkin even wrote a memo, later handed to police, summarizing her words about a plot to stage an accident. So it wasn't just one letter. There were multiple warnings, multiple instances where she said, "They are going to do this to me." She knew. She absolutely knew. And what did the authorities do with this evidence? Almost nothing. The note was kept secret for years. During the Paget inquiry, the British investigation into Diana's death, it was finally revealed. But by then, the damage was done. The official narrative had hardened. Henri Paul was drunk. The paparazzi were reckless. It was an accident, case closed. The note was brushed off as the ramblings of a paranoid woman. But does that explanation really hold water? Or is it a convenient way to avoid confronting the possibility of conspiracy? Now let's turn to the language of the note itself. Diana described her life at that moment as the most dangerous. Why? What had shifted? Was it her activism on landmines, which embarrassed powerful governments and arms manufacturers? Was it her romance with Dodi Fayed, which threatened to tie the future king's mother to an Egyptian Muslim billionaire? Or was it simply that she no longer fit the role the monarchy had carved for her? Whatever it was, Diana believed her survival was at risk. And she wrote it down not once, but several times, in different ways, to different people. And here's where the contradictions become unbearable. On the one hand, the world was told Diana died because of a drunk driver and frenzied paparazzi. On the other hand, we have her own words predicting that exact scenario as a murder disguised as an accident. Which story feels closer to the truth? Now think about the impact on William and Harry. For years, they were shielded from this note, shielded from their mother's most chilling warning. Imagine finding out later in life that your mother didn't just die. She predicted her death, in writing, and no one told you. Imagine discovering that your father, now King Charles, was directly named in that note. What would that do to your faith in your family? Your trust in the monarchy? Your sense of reality itself? Paul Burrell claimed Diana gave him the letter for safekeeping because she knew something was coming. She didn't want it to disappear. She wanted it preserved. It was her final insurance policy, her voice echoing into the future. And now, that voice is louder than ever. But here's the part that no one talks about enough: the timing of the letter. It wasn't written in her last days, in a moment of hysteria. It was written almost a year before her death, calmly, deliberately, in her own home. That makes it harder to dismiss as paranoia. This wasn't Diana panicking after a car chase or making an emotional outburst. This was Diana thinking clearly, writing carefully, and leaving a record. That detail changes everything. So let's ask the hard questions. If Diana foresaw her death so specifically, why wasn't she protected? Why wasn't her letter taken seriously? Why did it remain hidden for so long? And most importantly, who was she protecting when she begged for the truth to one day come out? Her sons. Always her sons. William and Harry. She wanted them to know, when the time was right, that their mother had fought until the end to leave them the truth. But the revelation of this note is only the beginning. Because the story doesn't end with Diana's warning. It continues with the man she named, Charles. The man who would become king. The man who eventually sat his sons down and revealed what he had known all along. And when William and Harry heard those words, when they finally faced the reality of their mother's plea, their reaction was devastating. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when the man once painted as the villain of Diana's story finally admits he has been keeping a secret? Imagine being William and Harry, already scarred by the trauma of losing your mother in the most public, horrifying way imaginable, only to learn years later that your father, now the king, had known something he never told you. A confession that doesn't just reopen old wounds, but rips them wide apart. King Charles has always carried the ghost of Diana with him. From the moment her coffin was lowered into the ground, his reputation was chained to her memory. He was the unfaithful husband, the cold spouse, the man who could never compete with her light. And yet, decades later, after climbing the long, bitter path to the throne, Charles revealed something that stunned his sons. He had kept Diana's dying wish hidden. He had known about her fears, and he had not shared them. Let's rewind. After Diana's death, fragments of her private fears began to surface. Letters, notes, testimonies. Some of these found their way into the hands of royal advisors, others to Charles himself. He knew Diana believed she was being targeted. He knew she suspected a staged accident. He knew her deepest fear wasn't just dying, it was being silenced. But what did Charles do with that knowledge? He kept it locked away. Why? Here's where the contradictions pile up. To some, Charles was protecting his sons. They were just boys, 12 and 15. How could they carry the burden of believing their mother's death might not have been an accident? How could they grow up with that kind of suspicion eating at them? Perhaps Charles thought silence was kindness. Perhaps he believed shielding them from Diana's paranoia, if that's what he saw it as, was the only way to let them heal. But there's another interpretation. What if Charles wasn't protecting his sons, but protecting himself? After all, Diana's letter named him directly. She accused him of plotting an accident to clear the way for a new life. Imagine being the man who receives that accusation. Would you hand it over to your children? Or would you bury it, hoping it never saw the light of day? The weight of this secret grew heavier as the years passed. William grew into the air, carrying the responsibility of the monarchy on his shoulders. Harry grew restless, angry, eventually breaking free from the palace altogether. And all the while, Charles remained silent. He watched his sons wrestle with their mother's legacy, with the unanswered questions surrounding her death, and he said nothing. Until one day, he finally did. Insiders whisper that it happened in a private meeting, after Charles had already ascended the throne. He sat his sons down, two men now in their 40s, no longer shielded by childhood innocence. And he told them what he had kept from them for so long. Their mother had left a message, a plea, a dying wish to protect the truth about her death, and that he had not told them sooner. Can you imagine the silence in that room? The weight of those words landing like a thunderclap? William, the composed future king, suddenly feeling like a boy again, blindsided by betrayal. Harry, already estranged, now furious that this secret had been hidden from him, confirming his darkest suspicions about the monarchy's silence. Reports say both men broke down. Tears, anger, a sense that their world, already fractured, had just shattered again. Now let's pause and ask, why now? Why did Charles wait decades to share this? Why? At the very moment he needed stability most as a new monarch, would he risk revealing something that could destabilize everything? Was it guilt eating away at him? Was it fear that the truth would come out anyway, and he needed to get ahead of it? Or was it, perhaps, an attempt to rewrite himself, not as the villain, but as the man brave enough to tell the truth, no matter how late? Here's the cruel irony. Diana's dying wish was to protect the truth about her death. But the man she accused was the one who controlled that truth. And by holding it back, Charles shaped the narrative for nearly 3 decades. He allowed the official story, accident, drunk driver, paparazzi chaos, to dominate. He allowed his sons to mourn without the full picture. And when he finally spoke, it was too late to undo the damage. Imagine the betrayal William and Harry must have felt. Not only did they lose their mother in one of the most tragic events of modern times, but they now had to face the fact that their father had kept her words from them, that the man who walked them behind her coffin, the man who was supposed to protect them, had chosen silence over truth. And yet, here's where the story twists again. Because some say Charles himself was a prisoner of the institution, that his silence wasn't just personal, it was strategic. Revealing Diana's note, her fears, her accusations, could have destabilized the monarchy at a time when it was already hanging by a thread. The public anger in 1997 nearly toppled the crown. Imagine if they had known then that Diana herself believed she had been targeted. Could the monarchy have survived? Charles may have believed he was not just protecting himself, but the entire system. But let's not forget what that system cost. It cost William and Harry the chance to process their grief honestly. It cost Diana the dignity of having her fears acknowledged. And it cost Charles whatever shred of credibility he might have had with his sons. The damage is irreversible. So now the question becomes, what do William and Harry do with this confession? Do they honor their mother's wish and expose the truth, risking the monarchy itself? Or do they stay silent, preserving the institution at the cost of their mother's legacy? It's a dilemma so painful, so impossible, that it tears at the very heart of who they are. And this is only the beginning of their struggle. Because while Charles's confession left them in tears, the real battle lay ahead. How each brother chose to carry Diana's dying wish would set them on paths that could either unite them in grief or divide them forever. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What does it mean to carry the weight of both a crown and a ghost? For Prince William, the answer lies in the years he has spent wrestling with the shadow of his mother, Princess Diana. Outwardly, he is the steady heir, the dutiful royal, the family man who has always seemed destined to keep the monarchy afloat. But behind closed doors, William's struggle has been one of silence, of restraint, of carrying truths too dangerous to speak. And that silence, rooted in Diana's dying wish, has defined his life more than anyone realizes. Let's begin with William the boy. Just 15 years old when his mother died, William walked behind her coffin with the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. Cameras captured his face, frozen, composed, while his insides shattered. The world applauded his bravery. But what we didn't see was the internal vow he made that day, to protect the monarchy for the sake of stability, and to protect his mother's legacy for the sake of love. Two promises that, sooner or later, would collide. Fast forward to adulthood. William has become the face of continuity. His marriage to Kate Middleton was celebrated as the fairy tale Diana never had. His 3 children represent the future of the crown. His public persona is calm, controlled, almost stoic. But if you look closer, you see the cracks. Those rare moments when William lets slip his feelings about the press, his fury at the cameras that hounded his mother, his coldness toward Harry's rebellion. Beneath that polished surface is a man who has spent decades trying to balance 2 impossible roles, son of Diana, and heir to the institution she fought against. Now add Charles's confession to the equation. Imagine William sitting across from his father, listening as the king admits he knew about Diana's fears, that she had left behind notes, letters, pleas to protect the truth about her death, that he had kept this knowledge from William and Harry for decades. What does William do with that? The dutiful heir in him knows he must protect the monarchy at all costs. But the son in him, the boy who kissed his mother's hand one last time before she was buried, feels betrayed. That inner battle is William's silent struggle. And it's not just about his father. It's about the institution itself. William knows better than anyone that the monarchy survives on secrecy, on silence. The motto has always been never complain, never explain. But how do you apply that when the silence is about your own mother's death? How do you stand before the world, representing the crown, when you know your mother's dying wish was for you to expose its darkest truth? That contradiction would haunt anyone. For William, it's the torment of his entire life. Let's pause for a moment. Imagine being in William's shoes. You've built a family of your own, with Kate and your children. You know their safety depends on the monarchy's survival. And yet, you carry the knowledge that the very system you're upholding may have played a role in silencing your mother. What choice would you make? Would you blow it all open, or would you bury it deeper, convincing yourself that the stability of millions outweighs the pain of one? The irony is that William has lived his life trying to be the opposite of Charles. He presents himself as loyal, loving, grounded, the kind of husband and father Diana always wanted him to be. He gives the world the stability Diana craved. And yet, at the same time, he is bound by the same silence that defined his father. He cannot speak openly about Diana's suspicions. He cannot acknowledge the note without shattering the crown he's destined to inherit. In trying to honor her memory, he has become a prisoner of her truth. But here's the twist. Some say William is biding his time, that he has told close friends he will one day address Diana's legacy more openly, but not while his father is alive. Not while the monarchy is too fragile to withstand the shock. The weight of that decision rests on him like an anchor. When he becomes king, will he keep the silence? Or will he finally honor his mother's wish? That question looms over every step he takes. Meanwhile, Harry's path could not be more different. While William bottles his emotions, Harry lets them explode. While William maintains silence, Harry speaks. And that difference, born of the same trauma, has driven a wedge between them. William believes silence protects. Harry believes silence kills. Neither is wrong, but both are trapped. And here's the cruelest part of William's struggle. The very thing that makes him appear strong to the public, his composure, his silence, is the same thing that eats away at him privately. He can't scream. He can't cry out. He can't reveal what he knows. Every time he looks at his children, he is reminded of the mother they'll never meet. Every time he walks into Buckingham Palace, he hears her voice telling him to protect the truth. And every time he bites his tongue, he wonders if he's betraying her all over again. So when Charles finally confessed Diana's dying wish, William's tears weren't just grief. They were guilt. Guilt that he had been living in silence while his mother's truth remained buried. Guilt that his loyalty to the crown had come at the expense of the woman who gave him life. Guilt that no matter what he does, he will disappoint someone. His mother, his father, his people, or himself. That is William's silent struggle. A man caught between two worlds. A son haunted by a note. An heir chained to a secret. And a future king who must one day decide whether to. But as William tried to hold himself together, Harry was breaking apart. His journey wasn't about silence. It was about rage. And when he heard Charles's confession, his reaction wasn't quiet torment. It was explosive. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when grief, anger, and betrayal all collide in one man's heart? For Prince Harry, the answer is simple. You explode. You run. You tear the mask off the institution and expose it to the world. And at the center of that storm is one name, Diana. From the moment his mother died, Harry was different from William. William buried his pain. Harry wore his on his sleeve. As a 12-year-old walking behind Diana's coffin, Harry later admitted he felt like a zombie, numb, forced to march while millions stared. The trauma etched itself into his soul. He grew up wild, reckless, desperate to numb the ache with parties, alcohol, and chaos. He admitted he used drugs to forget. He admitted he lashed out because he felt abandoned. And all of it boiled down to one truth. The boy who lost his mother never healed. Now fast forward to adulthood. Harry tried to find a role within the palace machine. He served in the military. He carried out engagements. He wore the uniform with pride. But deep down, the anger festered. The press that had hounded his mother now hounded him. Every flash of a camera reminded him of Paris. Every headline about his girlfriends, his mistakes, his wild behavior, felt like history repeating itself. And worst of all, the silence of the institution, the refusal to defend him or his mother, ate away at him like acid. Then came Meghan. To Harry, she wasn't just a partner. She was a chance to rewrite history. He saw her as Diana 2.0, hounded by tabloids, misunderstood by the palace, vulnerable yet defiant. He swore history wouldn't repeat itself. He said it himself. I lost my mother, and now I see my wife facing the same forces. That vow drove every decision he made, from marrying Meghan on his terms to walking away from the monarchy altogether. But here's the crucial part. Harry's rebellion wasn't just about Meghan. It was about Diana. Deep down, Harry never forgave the monarchy for what happened to his mother. He never forgave the silence. He never forgave the lies. And when Charles finally confessed Diana's dying wish, when Harry heard that his mother had begged for the truth to be protected, it was like ripping open an old wound that had never healed. Imagine Harry, sitting across from his father, listening to him admit that Diana's fears, her warnings, her plea, had been kept hidden. That he, Harry, had been denied the chance to carry out her wish because the institution decided he wasn't ready, or worse, didn't deserve to know. That moment wasn't just painful. It was shattering. Sources say Harry's reaction was volcanic. He wept, yes, but he also raged. He demanded answers his father couldn't give. Why hadn't they been told sooner? Why had the truth been buried? Was Charles protecting them? Or himself? Harry, already estranged from the palace, saw this as the ultimate betrayal. The very thing he had always suspected, that the monarchy cared more about its survival than about people, was confirmed in the most personal way possible. Let's pause and put ourselves in Harry's shoes. You grow up haunted by whispers that your mother's death wasn't an accident. You hear the conspiracy theories. You read the tabloids. You endure strangers shouting it at you in the street. And then, as a grown man, your father admits there's truth to it. That Diana herself wanted the truth protected, and he never told you. What would that do to you? Could you ever look at him the same way again? For Harry, it was the breaking point. His rift with the monarchy deepened into a chasm. His anger crystallized into resolve. This was no longer about living in America or protecting Meghan. This was about fulfilling his mother's dying wish. Harry became determined, more than ever, to expose the truth, to speak openly about the monarchy's failures. to challenge the narrative the palace had built around Diana's death. And here's the irony. The more Harry rebelled, the more he was painted as unstable, angry, ungrateful, just like Diana once was. The parallels are impossible to ignore. The institution that silenced his mother now tried to silence him. And just like his mother, Harry refused to play along. But rebellion comes at a cost. Harry's relationship with William, already strained, began to crumble further. William believed silence protected. Harry believed silence betrayed. Their mother's dying wish placed them on opposite sides of a war neither of them asked for. And as Charles's confession echoed in their ears, the brothers realized they had a choice to make: stand together and confront the truth, or let it tear them apart forever. So here's the question. Will Harry's anger finally push him to reveal everything he knows? Will he take Diana's plea into his own hands, even if it means burning the last bridge to his family? Or will William pull him back, urging caution, urging silence, urging loyalty to a crown that may have betrayed them both? That is Harry's breaking point. A man caught between loyalty to his blood and loyalty to his mother. A man whose rage might finally fulfill Diana's wish, or destroy the monarchy in the process. And as Harry's fury reached its peak, something extraordinary happened. For one fleeting moment, the brothers who had been torn apart by distance and bitterness found themselves united again. United by grief, by love, by their mother's voice echoing from beyond the grave. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. For years, the story of William and Harry has been one of division. Two brothers shaped by the same tragedy but scarred in different ways. William, the dutiful heir, silent and steady. Harry, the fiery spare, outspoken and defiant. The press fed on their rift, painting them as enemies on opposite sides of a family war. But in the wake of Charles's confession about Diana's dying wish, something extraordinary happened. The very secret that could have destroyed them became, for one brief, powerful moment, the thread that pulled them back together. Picture the scene. A private room. No cameras, no aides, no flashing lights. Just three men, a father and two sons. The confession lands like a grenade. Charles, voice heavy with age and regret, admitting that he knew of Diana's warnings, that he kept them hidden, that her dying plea was to protect the truth of her death. William crumbles, his composure shattered. Harry erupts, his rage boiling over. And then, silence. Not the cold silence of estrangement, but the raw, suffocating silence of grief. And then, almost instinctively, the brothers do what they have not done in years. They turn toward each other. William's tears fall, not in solitude, but alongside Harry's. Harry's fury, instead of being aimed at his brother, finds its echo in William's pain. In that moment, they are not heir and spare. They are not royal figures locked in battle. They are simply two boys again, mourning the mother they lost. Do you remember those haunting images from 1997? William and Harry, walking behind their mother's coffin, side by side, faces etched in stone. They did not cry then, at least not in public. They carried the weight of the monarchy's expectation, stiff upper lip, no emotion, no weakness. But now, decades later, in the privacy of that moment, the tears they never shed for the world came pouring out. It was as though Diana's spirit had broken down the walls between them. And make no mistake, Diana has always been the bridge. Even in death, she was the one thing that bound them. Her laugh, her warmth, her touch. Every memory of her was shared between only two people, William and Harry. No one else truly knew what it was like to be her son. And so, when Charles revealed her dying wish, it was as though her voice reached out from beyond the grave and pulled her boys into each other's arms. For William, this was both relief and torment. Relief that he wasn't alone in carrying the weight of Diana's legacy. Torment that he now had to face Harry, the brother he'd tried to push away, and admit they both had been living with the same wound. For Harry, it was vindication. Proof that his instincts were right, that his mother's fears were real. But it was also heartbreak, that the brother he felt abandoned by had been suffering in silence all along. Let me ask you, can you imagine the power of that reunion? Two men who had not trusted each other for years suddenly realizing they were fighting the same enemy, not each other, but the silence, the secrecy, the lies that had defined their mother's death. Can you imagine the weight lifted, even briefly, by that realization. But here's the cruel twist. Their unity, as powerful as it was, came with danger. Because if they chose to act on Diana's dying wish together, if they decided to expose the truth, they would not just be sons honoring their mother. They would be princes turning against the very crown that defined them. The stakes couldn't be higher. Imagine the conversations. William, cautious, thinking of his role as heir. If we reveal this, we destroy everything we've been raised to protect. Harry, furious, his voice breaking. If we don't reveal it, we betray her. We betray the one person who loved us above all else. Back and forth, the same argument that has always divided them, but now with tears instead of walls, with grief instead of bitterness. For one brief moment, the world's most famous brothers found themselves united in the only way that truly mattered, in their love for Diana. And yet, the question that loomed over them was terrifying. What would they do with this unity? Would it be the foundation for exposing the truth, or just a fleeting moment before they returned to their separate paths? Because the truth is, unity doesn't erase conflict. It doesn't erase decades of tension, resentment, and betrayal. It doesn't erase William's loyalty to the crown or Harry's determination to burn it all down. What it does is remind them, painfully, that at the heart of everything, the scandals, the headlines, the feuds, there is still the bond of two boys who lost their mother too soon. And here's where it gets even more chilling. Those closest to Diana, her allies, her confidants, the people she trusted, had their own stories. Stories that echoed her fears, stories that backed up her words, stories that added even more fuel to the fire now burning inside William and Harry. And when those voices came forward, the brothers realized Diana's dying wish wasn't just their burden. It was shared by others who had been waiting for years to speak. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if I told you Diana's warnings didn't die with her? That the words she whispered, the fears she confessed, the suspicions she carried, were preserved and echoed by those closest to her. Friends, confidants, staff, people who loved her, people who served her, people who believed her. For years, they stayed silent. Some out of fear, some out of loyalty, some out of sheer exhaustion from battling the royal machine. But eventually, they spoke. And when they did, their voices lined up with Diana's own, painting a picture too consistent, too chilling, to dismiss. Let's start with Paul Burrell, her longtime butler and loyal confidant. He was more than a servant. He was her shadow, her sounding board, the man she trusted when she couldn't trust anyone else. Burrell has repeatedly said Diana told him she feared for her life, that she believed dark forces were watching her. And then, of course, there was the famous letter, the one she gave him in October 1996, the one predicting her death in a staged car accident. Burrell kept it in his possession for years, calling it Diana's insurance policy. Imagine the weight of living with that knowledge, knowing the world was being fed one version of events while holding in your hands her prophecy of another. And then there's her lawyer, Lord Mishkin. He met with Diana just months before her death. She confided her fears to him as well. Mishkin was so disturbed, he wrote a memo documenting the conversation. In it, Diana said she believed there was a plan to stage an accident in her car. After her death, Mishkin gave the memo to police. It ended up buried in files, rarely mentioned until the Paget inquiry years later. Ask yourself, why wasn't that taken seriously? Why was such a crucial piece of testimony brushed aside? Diana's friends also noticed the change in her. Rosa Monckton, a close friend, described Diana as increasingly anxious in her final weeks, convinced she was being spied on. She complained of strange clicks on her phone lines, of cars following her. Even her private secretary, Michael Gibbons, admitted Diana seemed unsettled, as though she was living in constant expectation of disaster. Was that paranoia or perception? Then we have Mohammed Al-Fayed, Dodi's father. For years he has insisted the crash was no accident. He accused the establishment of orchestrating it to prevent Diana from marrying his son. Many dismissed his claims as the rantings of a bitter man. But remember, Al-Fayed had access to evidence, to witnesses, to financial resources that allowed him to push his own investigations. He raised questions that the official narrative refused to answer. The missing CCTV footage, the blinding flash in the tunnel, the role of French and British intelligence. Was he right? Or was he simply voicing what others were too afraid to say? Let's not forget her bodyguard, Ken Worf. He served Diana faithfully and later admitted she had expressed serious concerns about her safety. Worf believed she was right to fear for her life, even if he didn't go as far as to accuse the monarchy directly. Still, when you stack his testimony alongside Burrell's, Mishkin's, Monckton's, and Al-Fayed's, a clear pattern emerges. Diana believed she was being hunted, and those around her believed she was right to be afraid. Now, pause for a moment. Doesn't it strike you as strange how consistently her allies tell the same story? If only one or two had spoken, maybe you could dismiss it. But when nearly everyone who knew her echoes the same refrain, that she feared an accident was being staged, it becomes impossible to ignore. So why has the official narrative worked so hard to downplay these voices? The answer is simple: because their words threaten to unravel everything. If Burrell, Mishkin, and the others are right, then Diana's death wasn't just tragedy. It was betrayal. Betrayal of a woman by the institution she once served. Betrayal of a mother by the system her sons were born into. Betrayal of truth itself. And this is where the story takes on a new urgency. Because William and Harry, already devastated by their father's confession, began to realize their mother's fears were not isolated. They weren't the ramblings of a paranoid woman. They were corroborated by people who loved her, people who stood by her, people who risked their reputations to make sure the world knew. Imagine the impact of hearing that, of realizing your mother wasn't alone in her fear, that her dying wish to protect the truth was shared by those she left behind. And yet, the more these allies spoke, the more the establishment worked to discredit them. Burrell was accused of profiting off Diana's memory. Al-Fayed was painted as a conspiracy theorist. Mishkin's memo was locked away. Over and over, the same pattern: silence the voices, dismiss the evidence, bury the truth. Doesn't that sound familiar? Isn't that exactly what Diana herself said would happen? So let me ask you, who do you believe? The official reports insisting it was all a tragic accident? Or the voices of those who knew Diana best, all echoing the same chilling warning she herself gave? For William and Harry, the answer was becoming harder to ignore. With every testimony, every corroborating story, they felt their mother's voice growing louder. It was no longer just a note in Burrell's safe or a line in a lawyer's memo. It was a chorus of voices crying out for justice. And that chorus left the brothers facing a terrifying realization. If they stayed silent, they weren't just betraying Diana. They were betraying everyone who tried to keep her truth alive. But the moment you ask who benefits from silence, you inevitably stumble into dangerous territory. Because Diana's allies didn't just point fingers at the paparazzi or the French authorities. Some of them hinted at something far more terrifying: the establishment itself. And when you follow that trail, you begin to understand why Diana's death still terrifies the monarchy nearly 30 years later. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Why does the truth about Diana's death still terrify the monarchy nearly 3 decades later? Why, in a world where so much has been revealed, scandals, affairs, financial secrets, betrayals, does this one story remain untouchable, wrapped in silence, cloaked in fear? The answer is simple: because it's not just about Diana. It's about the survival of the entire establishment. Let's begin with the fundamentals. The monarchy is not just a family. It's an institution, a symbol, a machine designed to project stability and continuity, no matter the cost. Every scandal, every whisper of betrayal is managed, spun, buried, until it becomes a footnote instead of a threat. But Diana was different. Her death was different. Because if it was not an accident, if it was something darker, then it would mean the very institution tasked with protecting her sons allowed, or even orchestrated, their mother's destruction. And once that idea takes hold, how does the monarchy survive? This is why, from the very beginning, the establishment rushed to shape the narrative. Henri Paul was drunk. The paparazzi were reckless. It was tragic, yes, but also simple. That version was neat, digestible, controllable. Anything beyond that, the notes, the warnings, the testimonies, was dismissed as paranoia or conspiracy. Why? Because even the suggestion of foul play connected to the monarchy would have detonated public trust. And in 1997, public trust was already at breaking point. Remember those days after Diana's death? The Queen under fire for staying silent in Balmoral. The fury of the British public, who left mountains of flowers outside Kensington Palace and demanded answers. For the first time in modern history, the monarchy looked like it could actually fall. That's how powerful Diana was, even in death. That's how dangerous the truth could be. Now consider the role of the media. The tabloids were complicit in shaping Diana's life and her death. They chased her mercilessly, printed her most intimate secrets, mocked her fears. After the crash, they pivoted to painting her as the victim of reckless photographers. Convenient, isn't it? The same press that tormented her became the easy scapegoat. But here's the irony. The press was also terrified of digging too deeply. Too many of their own fingerprints were on the story. Too many of them had relationships with the crown, with the establishment, with the very forces Diana feared. So the press, too, had reason to keep the truth buried. And what about the government? Let's not forget Diana's activism against landmines. In the 1990s, her campaign embarrassed world leaders and threatened powerful industries. She walked through minefields. She hugged victims. She turned her spotlight on an issue that made arms manufacturers and politicians squirm. Was she a humanitarian or a liar?